Marcus Chen had been scrapping derelict ships in the Outer Rim for 12 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. Burned-out hulks from the Hegemony War, ancient cargo vessels that had been drifting for centuries, even the occasional pirate ship with its crew still frozen at their stations. But, as he floated through the airlock of the massive Zeltharian battlecruiser that had appeared on his salvage scanner 3 days ago, he knew this was different. The ship was wrong in ways that made his skin crawl. Not just damaged or destroyed, but wrong. The corridors stretched longer than they should have, disappearing into darkness that his suit lights couldn't penetrate. The walls were covered in a substance that looked like metal but felt organic under his gloved touch. And, everywhere, scattered like discarded toys, were the bodies of the Zeltharian crew. Marcus had dealt with alien corpses before. The Zeltharians were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and skin like burnished copper. They died as they lived, with weapons in their hands and defiance in their eyes. But these bodies were different. They looked drained, somehow smaller than they should have been, their usually vibrant copper skin turned a sickly gray-green. He was 3 decks deep into the ship when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it over the hum of his recycling systems. Breathing. Ragged, desperate breathing that definitely wasn't coming from his own lungs. Marcus followed the sound through a maze of corridors that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. His suit's navigation system kept glitching, showing him impossible routes through spaces that shouldn't exist. But the breathing grew stronger, more urgent, and he pressed forward. The sound led him to what must have once been the ship's detention center. Rows of energy barriers flickered weakly, their power systems failing. Most of the cells were empty, but, in the farthest corner, behind a barrier that sparked and wavered like dying fire, something moved. At first, Marcus thought it was another Zeltharian. The figure was tall and thin, collapsed against the back wall of the cell. But, as he moved closer, his suit lights revealed details that made him stop dead in his tracks. She was young, maybe equivalent to a human teenager, but she wasn't Zeltharian. Her skin was pale blue-white, almost translucent, revealing delicate bone structure underneath. Her hair, if it could be called hair, was more like fine crystalline fibers that caught and refracted his lights into dancing rainbows. Forearms like the Zeltharians, but slender and graceful instead of thick with muscle. And her eyes, when they fluttered open at the sound of his approach, were solid silver without any visible pupil. She was clearly dying. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, her skin had an unhealthy gray tinge, and Marcus could see her ribs through the thin material of what might once have been clothing. But, when those silver eyes focused on him, he saw something that stopped his heart. Intelligence. Awareness. And, underneath it all, a resignation that told him she'd given up hope long ago. The universal translator in his suit crackled to life as she whispered something in a language that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Please, don't let them know. I'm still alive. Marcus stared at her through his helmet visor, his mind racing. The smart thing to do would be to leave. File a report with the salvage authority, let them deal with whatever this was. He had enough problems without getting involved in alien politics or whatever nightmare had happened on this ship. But, as he watched, she tried to pull herself further back into the corner of the cell, those silver eyes never leaving his face. She was afraid of him. Terrified, even. And, suddenly, Marcus was remembering another young girl, human this time, hiding in a bombed-out building on Kepler Prime during the last days of the war. Remembering how she'd looked at him with that same resignation, that same acceptance of death. He'd walked away from that girl. Orders were orders, and civilians weren't his responsibility. He'd found out later that she'd died 3 days after he left, alone in the ruins of her home. He wasn't walking away this time. The energy barrier flickered as Marcus approached, its failing power systems no match for the plasma cutter on his salvage rig. The barrier collapsed with a sound like breaking glass, and immediately the girl tried to scramble away from him, pressing herself against the far wall. Easy, Marcus said, his translator converting his words into that wind chime language. I'm not going to hurt you. She stared at him for a long moment, those alien eyes searching his face through his helmet visor. Human, she whispered, and there was something like wonder in her voice. You're human. Yeah, Marcus said, surprised. You know about humans? A sound that might have been laughter escaped her throat, though it was too weak to be sure. The Zeltharians, they fear you. They say, humans are cursed. That you make everything you touch stronger. Marcus knelt down slowly, keeping his movements calm and unthreatening. Up close, he could see that she was in even worse condition than he'd thought. Her skin was not just gray but seemed to be slowly turning transparent. He could actually see her circulatory system, a network of silver lines that pulsed weakly with whatever passed for blood in her species. What's your name? He asked. Lyra, she whispered. My name is Lyra. I'm Marcus. Can you tell me what happened here? Lyra's eyes drifted closed, and, for a moment Marcus thought she'd lost consciousness. But, then, she spoke, her voice so quiet he had to increase his suit's audio pickup to hear her. My people, the Etherians, we were prisoners. The Zeltharians, they wanted to study us. To understand why. She paused, gathering strength. Why we could manipulate quantum fields with our minds. They thought they could steal our abilities. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's failing life support. How long have you been here? I don't know. Time moves strangely on this ship. Months? Years? She opened her eyes again, looking directly at him. The others, my family, they died one by one. The Zeltharians kept taking them away for experiments. I was the last. What happened to the crew? The Zeltharians? Lyra's expression grew distant, almost dreamy. I got angry. Really angry. And, sometimes, when Etherians get angry. She gestured weakly at the distorted corridors around them. Reality gets flexible. Marcus stared at her, pieces of a horrifying picture falling into place. The twisted corridors, the drained corpses, the way his navigation system kept glitching. This girl hadn't just killed the crew. She'd warped the entire ship with the force of her rage and grief. How long since you've eaten? He asked. I don't remember, she admitted. We don't eat food like other species. We absorb energy from living things around us. But, there's nothing alive on this ship anymore. Nothing except. She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. Nothing alive except him. And, she was starving. The smart thing to do would still be to leave. Call for backup, let someone else handle this. But, Marcus looked at this dying alien girl and saw not a potential threat, but a kid who'd been tortured and experimented on until her grief had literally reshaped reality. A kid who was now dying alone in the dark because she had no choice but to kill the only living things around her. Lyra, he said slowly, if I helped you get out of here, what would happen? She stared at him as if he'd suggested they fly to the nearest star. You can't. The ship, it's not really a ship anymore. It's part of me now, part of my pain. If I leave, it dies. And if it dies while I'm still connected to it. You die too, Marcus finished. She nodded weakly. Marcus sat back on his heels, thinking hard. His salvage ship had decent medical facilities, food synthesizers that could be programmed for almost any known alien biochemistry. If he could get her aboard, he could probably keep her alive long enough to figure out what to do next. But, first, he had to solve the problem of getting her off a ship that was apparently held together by her own psychic trauma. Lyra, he said, I want to try something. But, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Those silver eyes studied his face for what felt like an eternity. Why, she whispered. Why would you help me? Your species, you have no reason to care about Etherians. We're nothing to you. Marcus thought about that human girl on Kepler Prime, about all the times he'd followed orders and done what was smart instead of what was right. About 12 years of scrapping dead ships and finding dead crews and walking away from their stories without a backward glance. Maybe that's exactly why I should care, he said. He reached out slowly, offering his gloved hand. What do you say? Want to get out of here?
Lyra stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment.
Then, with obvious effort, she reached out with one of her forearms and touched his fingers. The moment their hands made contact, even through his suit's gloves, Marcus felt something impossible. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, a sense of connection that went deeper than words. And, in that connection, he felt her emotions as clearly as if they were his own. Her pain, her loneliness, her grief for her lost family. But, underneath it all, for the first time in what must have been months or years, a tiny flicker of hope.
"Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Let's try."
Marcus helped her to her feet, surprised by how light she was. She couldn't weigh more than 90 pounds despite being nearly as tall as he was. Her legs shook with the effort of standing, and she had to lean heavily against him for support. "The ship," she said, her breathing labored from the simple effort of standing.
"I need to let it go. But I don't know how." Marcus looked around at the twisted corridors, at the impossible geometry that defied physics. "What if you didn't have to let it go all at once? What if we could? I don't know, untangle you from it gradually?"
Lyra looked at him with those alien eyes, and he could feel her confusion through their strange connection.
"I don't understand."
"You said you absorb energy from living things," Marcus said, his mind working furiously.
"What if I shared some of mine? What if that gave you enough strength to start separating yourself from the ship?"
The look of shock on her face was so intense that Marcus actually took a step back.
"You would, but that could kill you. If I take too much."
"Then, don't take too much," Marcus said simply.
"Start small. See how it feels."
Lyra stared at him as if he'd just offered to cut off his own arm and hand it to her. Which, Marcus reflected, might not be too far from the truth. But, looking at this dying girl, feeling her desperation and pain through their connection, he knew he had to try.
"I don't understand humans," Lyra whispered. "The Zeltharians were right. You are cursed." "Maybe," Marcus said.
"But, sometimes being cursed is just another word for being free." Lyra closed her eyes, and Marcus felt something shift in their connection. A gentle pull, like a tide drawing water from the shore. Energy flowed from him to her, not painful but strangely intimate, as if she were sharing not just his strength but his memories, his emotions, his very sense of self. And, as the energy flowed between them, Marcus felt the ship around them begin to change. The twisted corridors slowly straightened. The organic-looking walls returned to normal metal. The impossible geometry that had made his navigation system glitch resolved itself into conventional deck plans.
Lyra's eyes snapped open, silver irises now shot through with veins of gold.
"It's working," she breathed.
"I can feel myself separating."
"But, Marcus, the ship, when it fully returns to normal, it's going to start falling apart."
"The damage I did to it, the structural integrity." "How long do we have?" "Minutes. Maybe less."
Marcus looked around at the now normal but still damaged corridor. They were deep in the ship's interior, dozens of levels away from where he'd docked his salvage vessel. Even if they ran, even if nothing went wrong, they'd never make it in time. But, as he looked at Lyra, at the way the energy transfer had already restored some color to her pale blue skin, at the hope that was growing stronger in their shared connection, Marcus made a decision that went against every survival instinct he'd developed in 12 years of dangerous salvage work. "Then, we'd better start moving," he said. And, with that, Marcus Chen, veteran salvage operator and professional survivor, began the most important race of his life. Not for treasure or profit or glory, but for something he'd almost forgotten how to value, the life of someone who needed his help. As they stumbled through the rapidly destabilizing corridors of the dying battlecruiser, neither of them could have imagined that this moment, this simple act of one person refusing to abandon another, would become the first domino in a chain of events that would reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy. But, that's a story that starts with a single choice: to stay instead of leaving, to help instead of walking away, to care about a stranger's life more than your own safety.
That's the choice that makes us human. And, sometimes, being human is the most powerful force in the universe.
The ship screamed as reality reasserted itself.
Marcus had heard dying ships before, the groans and shrieks of metal under stress, the hiss of atmosphere venting into space. But this was different. This sounded like a living thing in agony, like the ship itself was mourning the loss of the impossible dream that had held it together. Lyra stumbled beside him as they ran through corridors that flickered between their twisted, organic state and cold military metal. Each step was a battle against her weakness and the ship's increasing instability. Gravity fluctuated wildly, sending them floating toward the ceiling one moment and slamming them into the deck the next. The quantum distortions, Lyra gasped, her forearms wrapped around Marcus's waist as he half-carried, half-dragged her toward the docking bay where his salvage ship waited. When I let go completely, the accumulated temporal displacement is going to snap back. The ship won't just fall apart, it'll what? Marcus demanded, pulling her around a corner as a section of ceiling collapsed behind them. It'll try to exist in all the states it's been in simultaneously, she said, her voice barely audible over the ship's death throes. Past, present, the twisted version, the normal version, they'll all try to occupy the same space. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. What happens then? Quantum implosion. Everything within a few thousand kilometers gets pulled into a very small, very temporary black hole. Well, Marcus said, adjusting his grip on her as they entered a lift shaft whose elevator car had apparently fallen to the bottom some time ago. That's just fantastic. He activated his suit's magnetic clamps and began climbing the shaft walls, Lyra clinging to him with desperate strength. The ship lurched around them, and Marcus could hear the sound of bulkheads tearing like paper somewhere in the distance. Marcus, Lyra said quietly, her voice directly in his ear through their strange connection rather than through his translator. I want you to know, what you're doing, no one has ever. Save the speeches for when we're not about to become a quantum pancake, Marcus said, but there was no harshness in his voice. Through their link, he could feel her gratitude like a warm current, and, underneath it, something else. Something that felt almost like family. They climbed in silence for several minutes, the ship's condition deteriorating around them. Marcus's suit systems were going crazy, trying to compensate for gravitational fields that changed direction every few seconds and an atmosphere that kept shifting between breathable air and toxic gases. When they finally reached the docking level, Marcus almost wept with relief. His ship, the Rust Bucket, a name that had seemed clever when he was 22 and drunk on cheap station alcohol, sat exactly where he'd left it. The airlock was still sealed, the docking clamps still holding firm despite the chaos around them. But, as they approached the ship, Lyra suddenly stopped moving. What's wrong? Marcus asked, though he could feel the answer through their connection before she spoke. The energy transfer, she said, her silver eyes wide with horror. It's still happening. I'm still drawing from you, and I can't stop it. Marcus looked down at her, seeing the veins of gold that now shot through her silver irises like lightning. She was right. He could feel the pull, stronger now than when it had started, as if their connection was a pipeline that was widening instead of closing. How much have you taken? He asked. Too much, she whispered. If we don't break the connection soon, you'll. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Marcus could feel it himself, a growing weakness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. She was draining more than just his energy. She was pulling at something fundamental, something that made him who he was. And, the worst part was, he didn't want to stop her. Through their link, he could feel what the energy was doing to her. Healing her, strengthening her, giving her back pieces of herself that had been lost during months or years of starvation. How could he cut that off? How could he doom her to death when he had the power to save her? Marcus, you have to let me go, Lyra said, her voice desperate. You have to break the connection. No, Marcus said simply. You don't understand. I can feel your life force. You only have minutes before I said no. Marcus pulled her toward his ship's airlock, his movements becoming clumsy as weakness spread through his limbs. We'll figure it out once we're off this death trap. The Rust Bucket's airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Marcus practically fell through the opening, dragging Lyra with him. His ship's AI, a modified mining computer he'd named Bucket, immediately began speaking in its usual cheerful tone. Welcome back, Marcus. I detect elevated stress levels and, oh my. You appear to be experiencing severe energy depletion. Shall I prepare the medical bay? Do it, Marcus gasped, sealing the airlock behind them. And, get us away from this ship. Maximum burn. I'm afraid I cannot comply with that order, Bucket said apologetically. Your current physical condition makes high G acceleration inadvisable. I could potentially cause permanent damage to Bucket, Marcus interrupted, his vision starting to blur. If you don't get us away from this ship in the next 60 seconds, we're all going to be sucked into a quantum black hole. So trust me when I say a little G-force damage is the least of our problems. There was a brief pause, then, the familiar vibration of the ship's engines spinning up to maximum power. Well, Bucket said cheerfully, when you put it like that. The acceleration hit them like a sledgehammer. Marcus felt his body pressed into the deck as the rust bucket shot away from the Zeltharian battlecruiser at nearly 10 times normal gravity. Through the ship's viewports, he could see the massive alien vessel growing smaller behind them, its hull flickering between states like a badly tuned hologram. Lyra lay beside him, her forearms wrapped around his chest, their connection still pulling energy from him in steady waves. But something had changed. Instead of the desperate, uncontrolled drain of before, the energy flow now felt regulated. Controlled. What did you do? He asked weakly. I learned something, she said, her voice stronger now despite the brutal acceleration. From your memories, through our connection. Humans don't just survive by taking what they need. You survive by sharing. By giving parts of yourself to others and letting them give parts of themselves to you. Marcus tried to turn his head to look at her, but the G-forces made it impossible. I don't understand. I do now. Instead of just taking your energy, I shared it back with you. Not the same energy, but pieces of myself. My memories, my knowledge, my abilities. She paused, and Marcus could feel something flowing back through their connection, not energy exactly, but something deeper. I think this is what humans call friendship. Before Marcus could respond, space behind them exploded into impossible colors. The Zeltharian battlecruiser folded in on itself like origami made of light and darkness, reality bending and twisting until the massive ship became a point of absolute blackness no larger than a marble. For a brief moment, that point pulsed with gravitational forces that Marcus could feel even at their safe distance. Then, it vanished, leaving nothing but empty space and a few scattered particles of exotic matter. Quantum implosion complete, Bucket announced happily. We are now at minimum safe distance and reducing acceleration to normal levels. Marcus, your life signs have stabilized, though I'm reading some very unusual quantum signatures from both you and our guest. The crushing weight of acceleration faded, leaving Marcus floating freely in the ship's main corridor. He looked down at Lyra, who was still clinging to him but no longer seemed to need the support. Her pale blue skin had regained its healthy translucent quality, and her silver eyes were now shot through with veins of gold that pulsed gently with their shared heartbeat. How do you feel? He asked. Lyra considered this question seriously, tilting her head in a way that reminded Marcus of a curious cat. Different, she said finally. Stronger, but also more connected. I can feel the quantum fields around us, but also. She looked directly at him. I can feel you. Your thoughts, your emotions, your memories. Is this normal for humans? Marcus laughed, a sound that held more hysteria than humor. Lady, nothing about this is normal for anyone. But, as he spoke, Marcus realized that he could feel something too. A presence at the edge of his consciousness, warm and alien and somehow familiar. When he focused on it, images flashed through his mind, vast crystal cities floating in the clouds of a gas giant, beings of living light dancing between the stars, libraries that contain not books but crystallized thoughts and dreams. Lyra, he said slowly, what exactly are Etherians? She floated next to him in the ship's microgravity, her forearms moving in graceful gestures that seemed to bend light around her fingers. We are translators, I suppose. Reality has many layers, many dimensions that most species cannot perceive. We exist partially in several of them simultaneously, which allows us to manipulate quantum fields, to see the connections between all living things. And now I can see them too? Some of them, she admitted. Our connection has changed you, just as it has changed me. You are still human, but now you are also something more. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to process what she was telling him. He was a salvage operator, a guy who fixed broken ships and sold scrap metal. He wasn't equipped to deal with quantum dimensions and alien psychic connections. But, as he floated there, he became aware of something he'd never noticed before. The ship around him wasn't just metal and circuits and atmosphere. It was alive, in its way. He could feel the AI's electronic consciousness, the rhythmic pulse of the reactor, even the complex quantum interactions that held matter together at the subatomic level. This is insane, he muttered. Yes, Lyra agreed cheerfully. But, also wonderful. Bucket's voice interrupted their philosophical discussion. Marcus, I hate to intrude on this touching moment of cross-species bonding, but we have a problem. Marcus opened his eyes, instantly alert. In 12 years of salvage work, Bucket had developed an uncanny ability to spot trouble before it spotted them. What kind of problem? 3 Zeltharian patrol ships just dropped out of hyperspace, Bucket said. They appear to be investigating the quantum signature left by the battlecruiser's destruction. And, unless I'm very much mistaken, they've detected us. Through the ship's viewports, Marcus could see 3 sleek warships hanging in space like predatory fish. They were smaller than the battlecruiser had been, but still easily powerful enough to vaporize a salvage ship like the Rust Bucket. How long until they reach us? Marcus asked. At their current speed, approximately 8 minutes, Bucket replied. I should mention that our hyperspace drive is still cycling from our emergency departure. We won't be able to jump for another 15 minutes. Marcus felt Lyra stiffen beside him. Through their connection, he could sense her fear, but underneath it was something else. Rage. The same rage that had twisted reality aboard the battlecruiser. They killed my family, she said quietly. They tortured us, experimented on us, treated us like animals. And now they're going to finish what they started. Not necessarily, Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. This is neutral space. They can't just attack civilian ships without cause. Lyra looked at him with those gold-flecked silver eyes, and Marcus could feel her bitter amusement through their connection. Marcus, I am the last Etherian in known space. My species was classified as extinct 6 months ago, after the Zeltharian Empire announced that we had all died of a plague. No one knows I'm alive except you, and them. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If the Zeltharian Empire had systematically exterminated an entire species and covered it up as a plague, then they would do anything to eliminate the last witness. Anything at all. Bucket, Marcus said, his voice carefully calm, how fast can this ship run? At maximum safe velocity, we can achieve approximately not safe velocity, Marcus interrupted. How fast can we go if we don't care about safety margins, structural integrity, or long-term engine damage? There was a pause that Marcus had learned to recognize as Bucket's way of expressing disapproval. Such acceleration would likely result in catastrophic system failures and possible hull breach. I cannot recommend, that's not what I asked. Very well. Throwing caution to the stellar winds, we could theoretically achieve speeds that would put us at the edge of Zeltharian sensor range within 6 minutes. However, the probability of survival would be approximately, don't tell me the odds, Marcus said. Just do it. Marcus, Lyra said softly, you don't have to do this. You could surrender me to them. Tell them you found me already dead. They might let you live. Marcus looked at her, feeling the genuine concern she had for his safety flowing through their connection. This alien girl, who had every reason to hate and distrust other species, was worried about him. A human she'd known for less than an hour. Lyra, he said, do you remember what I said about humans being cursed? She nodded. Well, here's the thing about curses, Marcus said, strapping himself into the pilot's chair and activating the ship's manual control systems. Sometimes they're really blessings in disguise. The ship lurched as Marcus pushed the engines far beyond their rated capacity. Warning lights flashed across every surface, and Bucket's voice rose to a pitch that could only be described as electronic panic. Marcus, engine temperature is exceeding safe parameters. Hull stress is approaching critical levels. Our current trajectory will take us directly through the Maelstrom Nebula, which I feel obligated to mention is widely considered unnavigable due to perfect, Marcus said, his hands dancing across the control panel with the skill of someone who'd been pushing broken ships to their limits for over a decade. No one will follow us into the Maelstrom. That's because no one who enters the Maelstrom ever comes out again. Through their connection, Marcus could feel Lyra's amazement. Not just at his reckless piloting, but at the decision itself. She couldn't understand why he was risking his life for someone he'd just met. The truth was, Marcus wasn't entirely sure he understood it himself. But, as they raced toward the swirling chaos of the Maelstrom Nebula with 3 Zeltharian warships in pursuit, he realized that for the first time in 12 years, he wasn't running away from something. He was running toward something. Toward a future where the last member of an extinct species might survive to tell her people's story. Toward a universe where power and cruelty didn't always win. Toward the person he used to be, before the war and the compromises and the slow erosion of hope had worn away everything he thought was important. Behind them, the Zeltharian ships opened fire. Energy bolts lanced through space, missing the rust bucket by margins so narrow that the hull sensors registered them as grazing hits. Ahead of them, the Maelstrom Nebula writhed like a living thing, its swirling gases shot through with electrical storms that could fry a ship's systems from 1,000,000 kilometers away. "Welcome to the Maelstrom," Marcus said, as they plunged into the dancing chaos of the nebula's outer edge. Population, everyone who was crazy enough to come here. And, for the first time since he'd found her dying in that alien prison, Lyra laughed. It sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze, and, through their connection, Marcus could feel her joy as clearly as if it were his own. They were alive. They were free. And they were about to find out whether being human really was the most powerful force in the universe. The Maelstrom Nebula was beautiful in the way that hurricanes are beautiful, or forest fires, or the surface of a star. From inside the rust bucket-s hull, Marcus watched lightning the size of solar systems dance between clouds of ionized gas that glowed in colors that didn't have names. It was the kind of beauty that killed you if you got too close to appreciate it. Which was exactly what they were doing. Hull integrity down to 60%, Bucket announced with admirable calm considering they were flying through what amounted to a cosmic blender. The electromagnetic interference is playing havoc with our navigation systems, and I'm afraid I've lost contact with the Zeltharian ships. They could be anywhere within a 50,000-kilometer radius. Or they could have turned around and gone home, Marcus said, though he didn't believe it. The Zeltharian Empire didn't give up easily, especially when the stakes were this high. "I don't think they've gone home," Lyra said quietly from where she floated near the ship's observation deck. Her forearms moved in complex patterns, and Marcus could see the quantum fields around her fingers bending and twisting in response to her gestures. "I can feel them. Their minds, their intentions. They're still hunting us." Through their connection, Marcus caught a glimpse of what Lyra was sensing. 3 points of focused malice moving through the nebulous chaos, their thoughts sharp and predatory and utterly determined. They weren't just following orders anymore. This had become personal. "How are they tracking us?" Marcus asked. "Sensors should be useless in this soup." "They're not using sensors," Lyra said, her silver eyes now completely shot through with veins of gold that pulsed in rhythm with the nebula's lightning storms. "They're using me." "What do you mean?" Lyra turned to face him, and Marcus could see tears running down her translucent cheeks. "The experiments they performed on my people, they weren't just trying to understand our abilities. They were trying to replicate them. To create artificial Etherians that would serve the Empire." The pieces clicked into place in Marcus's mind, and he felt sick. The ship's crew. The ones that looked drained. Failed test subjects. The Zeltharians tried to force quantum manipulation abilities on their own people. Most died in the process, but some. She closed her eyes, and Marcus could feel her pain through their connection. "Some survived long enough to create a resonance link with my family. A connection that let the Empire track us wherever we went. And now they can track you. Yes. As long as any of those artificial Etherians are alive, they can follow my quantum signature anywhere in the galaxy. She opened her eyes, and Marcus was startled by the resolve he saw there. That's why I have to surrender to them. Like hell you do, Marcus said. Marcus, you don't understand. If they capture me, they might be satisfied with just eliminating the last witness. But, if I keep running, if I keep fighting, they'll hunt down every human who's helped me. Every ship that's given me shelter. They'll turn this into a war. Marcus considered this, watching the nebulous storms rage outside their hull. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Lyra stared at him as if he'd suggested they fly directly into the nearest lightning storm. Which, Marcus reflected, might not be too far from what he was actually suggesting. A war with the Zeltharian Empire would be suicide for humanity, she said. They have 1,000 worlds, millions of ships, weapons that can crack planets. Your species has maybe 50 colonies and a merchant fleet. Yeah, Marcus agreed. But, we have something they don't. What? Marcus gestured to the chaos outside their ship, to the impossible storms that should have torn them apart a dozen times over but, somehow hadn't. We're too stupid to know when we're beaten. Before Lyra could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Bucket's voice cut through the noise with uncharacteristic urgency. 3 ships approaching from Vector 7 Mark II. They've somehow managed to navigate directly to our position despite the electromagnetic interference. Through the viewports, Marcus could see them, 3 sleek shapes moving through the nebulous storms with impossible grace. They rode the lightning like surfers on cosmic waves, their hulls flickering with the same quantum distortions that Marcus had seen in Lyra's abilities. They've modified their ships, Lyra breathed. Used the stolen Etherian abilities to navigate the nebula. That shouldn't be possible. Well, Marcus said, his hands already moving across the control panel, impossible seems to be the theme of the week. The lead Zeltharian ship opened a communication channel, and, the bridge filled with the voice of someone who was clearly used to being obeyed. Human vessel, you are harboring a war criminal of the Zeltharian Empire. Surrender the Etherian immediately, and, you will be permitted to depart unharmed. Marcus looked at Lyra, who was staring at the enemy ships with an expression of pure hatred. Through their connection, he could feel her quantum abilities building, reality beginning to bend around her as her emotions intensified. Lyra, he said softly, if you let your anger control your powers like you did on that battlecruiser, you'll kill us all. Maybe that would be better, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe we should all die rather than let them continue what they've done. Marcus reached out and took one of her 4 hands in both of his. The physical contact strengthened their connection, and he deliberately pushed his own emotions through the link. Not his fear or anger, but something else. Something he'd almost forgotten he was capable of feeling. Hope. There's another option, he said. Something they won't expect because it goes against every tactical manual ever written. What? Marcus activated the ship's communication system. Zeltharian vessels, this is Captain Marcus Chen of the independent salvage ship Rust Bucket. I have your war criminal aboard, and I'm prepared to hand her over. Through their link, Marcus felt Lyra's shock and betrayal like a knife to the heart. But he squeezed her hand and pushed reassurance through their connection. Trust me, his emotions said. Just trust me. However, Marcus continued, I have some questions about the legal basis of your claims. According to Galactic Concordat law, genocide is a crime against all sentient species. If the Etherians were systematically exterminated rather than dying of a plague as your government claims, then, harboring a survivor would be my legal obligation, not a crime. There was a long pause before the Zeltharian captain responded. The Etherian species was declared extinct due to a natural plague. No genocide occurred. Really? Marcus said, his voice taking on a tone of innocent curiosity. Then, you won't mind if I broadcast the testimony of the last Etherian to the Galactic Council. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear her side of the story. You will surrender the criminal immediately, or we will take her by force. Marcus looked at Lyra, whose silver eyes were wide with confusion. Through their connection, he could feel her starting to understand his plan. It was insane, suicidal, and completely contrary to every rule of space combat. Which was exactly why it might work. "Tell you what," Marcus said. "Why don't you come aboard and take her yourself? I'll drop my shields and open my airlocks. You can dock with my ship and search every compartment. I guarantee you won't leave disappointed." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Through the viewports, he could see the Zeltharian ships adjusting their positions, clearly trying to figure out what trap he was setting. "Marcus," Lyra whispered, "what are you doing?" "Something that should have been done a long time ago," Marcus said. "Bucket, prepare to transmit on all frequencies. Emergency broadcast to every ship, station, and colony within 50 light-years." "Marcus, that's madness. Broadcasting our location will bring every ship in the sector here, including human patrol ships," Marcus finished. "And merchant vessels. And maybe even a few military ships that happen to be in the neighborhood." Understanding dawned in Lyra's eyes. "You're not surrendering me. You're putting me on trial." "Public trial, broadcast to the entire galaxy," Marcus confirmed. "Let the Zeltharians explain to the Galactic Council why they're so desperate to silence the last witness to their genocide that they'll attack civilian ships in neutral space." The lead Zeltharian ship suddenly accelerated toward them, its weapon systems powering up. But Marcus had been expecting that. His hand hit the transmission button, and the Rust Bucket-esque communication array began broadcasting on every known frequency. "This is Captain Marcus Chen aboard the salvage vessel Rust Bucket, currently located in the Maelstrom Nebula at coordinates." He rattled off their position while the Zeltharian ships closed in. "I am in possession of testimony that proves the Zeltharian Empire committed genocide against the Etherian species. I am currently under attack by 3 Zeltharian military vessels attempting to silence this witness. Any ships capable of rendering assistance, please respond." The first energy bolt hit the Rust Bucket-S hull with a force that sent Marcus flying across the bridge. Emergency lights flashed, and Bucket's voice rose to a panicked whine. "Shields down. Hull breach on deck 3. Marcus, whatever you're planning, now would be a good time." But Marcus wasn't planning anything else. He'd done what he could. The message was out there, broadcasting across the galaxy, and now they just had to survive long enough for someone to hear it. The second energy bolt never came. Instead, space around them suddenly filled with new ships. Not the sleek military vessels of any major power, but a hodgepodge collection of freighters, salvage ships, mining vessels, and converted civilian craft that made up the galaxy's independent fleet. Marcus counted at least 20 ships, with more dropping out of hyperspace every few seconds. "Zeltharian vessels," came a voice on the emergency frequency. "This is Captain Sarah Martinez of the independent freighter Long Haul. You are attacking a civilian ship in neutral space. Stand down immediately." "This is Captain Kim of the Stellar Prospector," came another voice. "We've got you outnumbered 3-1 and climbing. Whatever that salvage jockey found, it must be pretty important for you to risk starting a war over it." Through the viewports, Marcus could see the Zeltharian ships hesitating. They were clearly caught between their orders to eliminate Lyra and the growing possibility that attacking her in full view of dozens of witnesses would create an even bigger problem. "This is Commander Voss of the Zeltharian cruiser Retribution," came the voice of the enemy captain. "The human vessel is harboring a dangerous criminal. We demand the right to search the ship under Imperial law." "Funny thing about Imperial law," said a new voice, this one belonging to Captain Elizabeth Stone of the human patrol vessel Defiance. "It doesn't apply in neutral space. And, according to Galactic Concordat regulations, any ship claiming to have evidence of genocide has the right to safe passage to the nearest council station." Marcus felt Lyra's amazement through their connection. She was staring at the collection of ships outside their viewports as if she'd never seen anything like them. And maybe she hadn't. The Etherians had lived in isolation for generations, and most spacefaring species organized themselves into rigid hierarchies and imperial fleets. But humans were different. Humans had spent centuries exploring space in whatever ships they could build, trade, steal, or salvage.
They formed loose confederations and temporary alliances, helped each other out of pure stubbornness, and generally refused to follow anyone's rules but their own.
"This is Captain Martinez again," came the freighter captain's voice. "Mr. Chen, we're prepared to escort you to Concordat Station 7. We've got enough ships here to ensure safe passage, and I think the Galactic Council would be very interested in hearing your passenger's story."
Marcus activated his communication system.
"Captain Martinez, this is Chen. I'd be honored to accept your escort." The Zeltharian commander's voice cut across the channel, tight with barely controlled rage. "This matter is not concluded, human. The Empire will not forget this interference."
"That's the point," Captain Martinez replied cheerfully.
"We're counting on it. See you around the galaxy, Commander."
As the Zeltharian ships retreated, their sleek forms disappearing into the nebulous storms, Marcus found himself surrounded by the most unlikely rescue fleet in galactic history. Converted mining ships flew alongside luxury yachts, ancient freighters kept pace with cutting-edge exploration vessels, and all of them were crewed by humans who had dropped everything to answer a distress call from a complete stranger.
"Marcus," Lyra said softly, "I don't understand. Why did they come? They don't know me, they have no obligation to risk their lives for an alien they've never met."
Marcus looked at the collection of ships outside their viewports, feeling something he hadn't experienced in 12 years. Pride in his own species.
"Because that's what humans do," he said. "We help people who need help. We protect people who can't protect themselves.
And, when someone tries to silence the truth, we make sure the whole galaxy hears it." Through their connection, Marcus felt Lyra's wonder as she began to understand what she was seeing.
Not just a rescue, but a statement. A declaration that some things mattered more than politics or profit or even personal safety.
"Your species really is cursed," she said, but she was smiling as she said it.
"Yeah," Marcus agreed, watching as the human fleet formed up around them for the journey to Concordat Station 7. "But sometimes being cursed is the best thing that can happen to you."
As they left the Maelstrom Nebula behind, surrounded by dozens of ships crewed by people who had risked their lives for a stranger, Marcus realized that everything was about to change.
The galaxy thought it knew what humans were capable of.
It was about to learn how wrong it had been. Concordat Station 7 hung in space like a massive crystal flower, its thousands of transparent petals catching and reflecting the light of the nearby star system. It was home to nearly 1 million beings from across the galaxy, all working together to maintain the fragile peace that kept interstellar civilization from tearing itself apart. Marcus had been here once before, 12 years ago, testifying at a war crimes tribunal after the Kepler Prime incident. He'd hoped never to return. Now, as the rust bucket approached the station surrounded by its escort of human ships, Marcus found himself thinking about that previous visit. About the questions he'd been asked, the answers he'd given, and the girl he'd failed to save.
Maybe this time would be different.
"I've never seen anything like it," Lyra said, her forearms pressed against the viewport as she stared at the station. Through their connection, Marcus could feel her awe at the sight of so many different species working together.
"On my homeworld, we lived in isolation. We thought that was the only way to be safe." "Maybe isolation isn't really safety," Marcus said.
"Maybe safety comes from having friends when you need them." The human escort fleet began to disperse as they approached the station, the various ships heading off to their own destinations now that their protective duty was complete. But not before each captain took the time to contact the rust bucket personally, offering help if it was needed, promising to spread word of what they'd witnessed, making sure Marcus and Lyra knew they weren't alone. "Bucket," Marcus said as they entered the station's traffic pattern, "send a message to the Galactic Council.
Tell them we're requesting an emergency session to present evidence of genocide against the Etherian species."
"Message sent," Bucket replied.
"I should mention that we've been assigned a priority docking bay and a full security escort. It seems our little adventure in the nebula has attracted quite a bit of attention."
Through the viewports, Marcus could see the security escort Bucket had mentioned, a full squadron of Concordat peacekeeping ships, their hulls bearing the symbols of a dozen different species. The sight should have been reassuring,
but Marcus found himself thinking about how easy it would be for Zeltharian agents to infiltrate such a mixed group. "Marcus," Lyra said quietly, "what if they don't believe me? What if the council decides that one alien girl's testimony isn't enough to challenge an entire empire?" Marcus looked at her, seeing the fear in her silver and gold eyes. Through their connection, he could feel her uncertainty, her growing awareness of just how vast and complex the political situation really was. She was the last of her people, carrying the weight of an entire species' memory, and she was barely more than a child by any reasonable measure. "Then, we make sure they have more than just your testimony," Marcus said. "Bucket, did you record everything that happened on the Zeltharian ship?" "Of course. Full sensor logs, visual recordings, atmospheric analysis showing the presence of exotic particles consistent with quantum manipulation, and detailed scans of the ship's modified structure. I also have recordings of the Zeltharian commander's transmissions, including several statements that could be interpreted as admissions of guilt." "What about the quantum resonance traces?" Lyra asked. "The ones the artificial Etherians used to track me?" Bucket paused, processing the question. "I'm detecting quantum signatures that don't match any known natural phenomena. If these are indeed traces of artificially induced Etherian abilities, they would constitute physical evidence of illegal experimentation." As they docked with the station, Marcus found himself surrounded by more security personnel than he'd seen outside of active war zones. Concordat peacekeepers, human diplomatic guards, and even a few species he didn't recognize. All of them were here to protect one alien girl who had accidentally become the most important witness in galactic history. The station's docking bay was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate ships from hundreds of different species with wildly varying atmospheric and gravitational requirements. The rust bucket settled into its assigned berth with a gentle thud, and Marcus felt some of the tension leave his shoulders for the first time in hours. "Captain Chen," came a voice through the communication system, "this is Administrator Kelvik of Concordat Station 7. We've prepared quarters for you and your passenger, and the Galactic Council has agreed to convene an emergency session to hear your testimony. However, I must warn you that the Zeltharian Empire has lodged formal protests and is sending a full diplomatic mission to contest any evidence you might present." Marcus looked at Lyra, who was pale but determined. "How long do we have?" "The emergency session is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Standard Time." "I'm afraid the Council can't delay any longer without appearing to take sides in what the Zeltharians are calling an internal matter." "Understood," Marcus said. "We'll be ready." But, as they prepared to leave the ship, Marcus caught sight of something through the viewport that made his blood turn cold. Docked at the far end of the bay, almost hidden behind a massive cargo hauler, was a ship he recognized. Sleek, black, and bearing the insignia of the Zeltharian Imperial Intelligence Service. They weren't the only ones who had made it to the station. The quarters the Concordat provided were luxurious by station standards, but Marcus barely noticed the amenities. He was too busy pacing back and forth while Lyra sat in the center of the room, her forearms moving in the complex patterns that Marcus had learned meant she was manipulating quantum fields. "Can you sense them?" he asked. "The artificial Etherians?" "3 of them," Lyra confirmed, her voice tight with concentration. "They're trying to mask their quantum signatures, but the resonance connection makes them impossible to hide completely. They're on this station, and they're getting closer." Marcus activated his communicator. "Administrator Kelvik, this is Captain Chen. We may have a security problem." "What kind of security problem?" "The kind where Zeltharian agents are planning to eliminate a key witness before she can testify." There was a pause, then Kelvik's voice returned, much more serious than before. "We're increasing security around your quarters immediately." "Can you provide any specifics about the nature of the threat?" Marcus looked at Lyra, who nodded grimly. 3 individuals with artificially enhanced quantum manipulation abilities. They can phase through solid matter, become invisible to most sensors, and probably tear apart your security systems with their bare hands." "I see. We'll need to implement some rather unusual countermeasures." The next few hours passed in a blur of security briefings, equipment installations, and increasingly exotic protective measures. The Concordat's experts in exotic threats worked with Lyra to develop sensors that could detect quantum field manipulation, while Marcus found himself explaining over and over again how he'd managed to survive contact with a species that could apparently bend reality at will. "It's the connection," he told Dr. Zareth, the station's chief xenobiologist. "When Lyra shared her energy with me, it created a quantum entanglement between us. I can sense what she senses, feel what she feels. And, apparently, it works both ways." Dr. Zareth, a tall being with crystalline skin and too many eyes, studied Marcus with obvious fascination. "This is unprecedented. No other species has ever successfully formed a quantum bond with an Etherian. The energy requirements alone should have killed you." "Yeah, well," Marcus said, "humans are stubborn that way." But, even as he spoke, Marcus was aware of something growing stronger in their connection. Lyra's abilities were expanding, becoming more refined and powerful with each passing hour. And, through their bond, he could feel those same abilities awakening in himself. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. A sense of the quantum foam that underlied reality, an awareness of the connections between all living things. He was changing, becoming something that was human but also more than human. And he wasn't sure how he felt about that. His brooding was interrupted by an urgent chime from the room's communication system. "Captain Chen, this is Administrator Kelvik. We have a situation. The Zeltharian diplomatic mission has arrived, and they're demanding immediate access to your quarters." "On what grounds?" "They're claiming that the Etherian is a dangerous criminal who has somehow compromised your mental faculties. They're requesting permission to perform what they call a quantum cleansing to restore your normal psychological state." Through their connection, Marcus felt Lyra's spike of terror. A quantum cleansing. He didn't know exactly what that meant, but he could guess. It would sever their bond, probably killing Lyra in the process and leaving Marcus with no memory of what he'd witnessed. "Tell them to file a formal complaint," Marcus said. "We're not going anywhere until after the testimony tomorrow." "I'm afraid it's not that simple. The Zeltharian delegation includes a council member, and she's invoking emergency protocols. If they can demonstrate that you pose a clear and present danger to station security." Marcus felt his heart sink. The Zeltharian Empire might be guilty of genocide, but they were also a major galactic power with enormous political influence. If they wanted to silence Lyra badly enough, they could probably find a way to do it legally. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Maybe an hour before they complete the necessary paperwork." "I'm sorry, Captain. I'm doing everything I can, but..." The connection closed, leaving Marcus and Lyra alone in their suddenly inadequate quarters. Through their bond, Marcus could feel her resignation, her acceptance that this was where the story ended. She'd escaped the Zeltharian ship, survived the nebula, even made it to the station where her testimony might have changed everything. But, in the end, politics and power were going to win. "I'm not giving up," Marcus said aloud. "There has to be something we can do." "Like what?" Lyra asked softly. "We're trapped on a station controlled by the same council that includes Zeltharian representatives. They have legal authority here, and we're just..." She stopped mid-sentence, her silver eyes going wide. Through their connection, Marcus felt a sudden spike of excitement, followed immediately by fear. "What is it?" he asked. "The artificial Etherians," she whispered. "They're not just here to capture me. They're here to demonstrate their abilities to the Council. To prove that the Zeltharian Empire has successfully replicated Etherian powers and, therefore has a legitimate claim to our homeworld and all our technology." Marcus stared at her. "That's why they're pushing so hard for a quantum cleansing. It's not just about eliminating a witness. It's about proving they don't need witnesses because they have their own Etherians now. Which means," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger, "that if I can prove their artificial Etherians are flawed, unstable, dangerous, if I can show the Council what the stolen abilities really cost, you'd be exposing the entire genocide," Marcus finished. "Not just the murder of your people, but the reason behind it. The theft of your species' abilities." They looked at each other for a long moment, both understanding what they were contemplating. Instead of hiding from the artificial Etherians, they would have to confront them. In public. In front of the entire Galactic Council. It's insane, Marcus said. Yes, Lyra agreed. But it's also our only chance. Marcus activated his communicator. Administrator Kelvik, this is Captain Chen. We'd like to request an immediate change to tomorrow's proceedings. What kind of change? We want to hold the testimony in the main council chamber, open to public viewing. And we want to invite the Zeltharian delegation to bring their artificial Etherians to demonstrate their abilities. There was a long pause. Captain, I'm not sure that's wise. If these artificial beings are as dangerous as you suggested, then the council needs to see that for themselves, Marcus said. The truth about what the Zeltharian Empire has done. All of it. As he spoke, Marcus felt Lyra's hand slip into his, their connection flaring with shared determination. Tomorrow, they would stand before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and tell a story that would either change everything or get them both killed. But tonight, they had work to do. Because if they were going to expose the truth about the Etherian genocide, they needed to understand exactly what they were up against. And that meant finding a way to study the artificial Etherians without getting themselves killed in the process. Lyra, Marcus said, how do you feel about a little reconnaissance mission? Through their bond, he felt her mixture of fear and excitement. I think, she said, that it's time to show the galaxy what real Etherians can do. The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of architecture and politics, a vast spherical space where representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to debate the future of civilization. Floating platforms accommodated beings from methane-breathing gas giants and water-dwelling ocean worlds, while holographic projectors allowed those too large or too small for physical attendance to participate as shimmering images. Marcus had never imagined he'd stand in this place, much less as the center of attention for every major power in the galaxy. He felt profoundly out of place in his salvage operator's jumpsuit, surrounded by beings who commanded fleets and ruled star systems. Beside him, Lyra seemed equally overwhelmed, her forearms trembling slightly as she took in the scope of the gathering. Through their connection, Marcus could feel her awe and terror in equal measure. She was about to accuse one of the galaxy's greatest powers of genocide in front of everyone who mattered. The emergency session of the Galactic Council is now in session, announced Administrator Kelvik from the central platform. We are here to examine evidence presented by Captain Marcus Chen of the Terran Confederation regarding alleged crimes against the Etherian species. In the Zeltharian section of the chamber, Marcus could see Ambassador Vexstar, a massive four-armed figure whose copper skin gleamed under the chamber's lights. Beside the ambassador stood three smaller figures in dark robes, their faces hidden but their presence unmistakable. The artificial Etherians, ready to demonstrate their stolen abilities. The Empire objects to these proceedings, Ambassador Vexstar declared, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. The individual known as Lyra is a dangerous criminal, mentally unstable and capable of reality-altering abilities that threaten the safety of this entire station. And, yet, came a voice from the Terran delegation platform, you've brought three individuals with similar abilities to this very chamber. Marcus turned to see Ambassador Sarah Chen, his distant cousin and humanity's chief representative to the council, standing with arms crossed and an expression that promised trouble for anyone who tried to intimidate her delegation. The Empire's enhanced operatives are fully trained and psychologically stable, Ambassador Vexstar replied. Unlike this wild, uncontrolled creature. Through their connection, Marcus felt Lyra's anger flare at being called a creature. The air around her shimmered slightly, and several of the nearby council members shifted nervously on their platforms. Perhaps, Administrator Kelvik said quickly, we should begin with the testimony and evidence presentation. For the next hour, Marcus and Lyra laid out their story. The discovery of the battlecruiser, the tortured prisoners, the failed experiments, the systematic extermination of an entire species. Bucket's recordings played on holographic displays throughout the chamber, showing the twisted corridors of the dying ship and the drained corpses of the Zeltharian crew. But it was Lyra's testimony that truly captured the chamber's attention. She spoke quietly, almost hesitantly, but her words carried the weight of unimaginable loss. They took my mother first, she said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow audible throughout the vast chamber. For 3 days, we could hear her screaming from the laboratory levels. When they brought her back, she wasn't my mother anymore. Just a shell, a broken mind in a body that no longer knew how to exist. The chamber was silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Marcus could see council members from dozens of species leaning forward, their attention completely focused on the pale blue girl who stood in the center of their gathering. They said it was for the good of the Empire, Lyra continued. That our abilities would help them bring order to the galaxy. But they didn't understand what they were stealing. Etherian quantum manipulation isn't just a power you can copy. It's part of our soul, our connection to the fundamental forces that hold reality together. When they tried to force it into other species. She gestured to the recording still playing on the chamber's displays, showing the drained Zeltharian corpses. This is what happens. The stolen abilities consume the host from the inside out. Ambassador Vexstar stood abruptly. Lies and propaganda. The Empire's enhanced operatives are proof that Etherian abilities can be successfully integrated into other species. Then, let's see them, Ambassador Chen said smoothly. If your artificial Etherians are as stable as you claim, surely they can demonstrate their abilities safely in this controlled environment. Marcus felt a chill of anticipation. This was the moment they'd been building toward, the confrontation that would either vindicate Lyra's testimony or prove the Zeltharian Empire's claims. Very well, Ambassador Vexstar said. Operative Zekmel, demonstrate your capabilities. One of the robed figures stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal a face that had once been typically Zeltharian but was now something else entirely. His copper skin had taken on a sickly translucent quality similar to Lyra's, but, where her translucence was natural and beautiful, his look diseased. His eyes, originally solid black like all Zeltharians, now glowed with an unstable silver light. The artificial Etherian raised his 4 arms, and, immediately the air around him began to distort. Quantum fields twisted and bent, reality rippling like water disturbed by a stone. It was an impressive display of power, far beyond what any normal being could achieve. But, through his connection to Lyra, Marcus could sense something the others couldn't. The artificial Etherian's abilities weren't just copied from his people, they were wrong. Twisted. Where Lyra's quantum manipulation felt like music, harmonious and controlled, this creature's power was discord, violent and unstable. As you can see, Ambassador Vexstar said, our enhanced operatives have full control over Etherian abilities. The claims of instability are clearly false. Are they? Lyra said quietly, stepping forward. May I examine your operative more closely? You will not approach our personnel, Ambassador Vexstar snapped. But Lyra was already moving, her own quantum abilities creating a field of calm around her that made her seem to glide rather than walk. As she approached the artificial Etherian, the creature's unstable silver eyes locked onto hers. You're in pain, she said softly, speaking directly to the artificial Etherian. I can feel it through the quantum resonance. The stolen abilities are burning you from the inside out, aren't they? The creature's face contorted with what might have been recognition or agony. For a moment, his artificial control slipped, and the council chamber was filled with the psychic scream of a mind being torn apart by forces it was never meant to contain. Operative Zekmel, maintain control. Ambassador Vexstar commanded. But, it was too late. The artificial Etherian's quantum field destabilized completely, reality warping around him in ways that made the chamber's gravity generators scream in protest. Council members dove for cover as pieces of the chamber's architecture began to phase in and out of existence. The quantum cascade is spreading, someone shouted. If it reaches the station's power core, Lyra stepped directly into the chaos, her own abilities reaching out to contain the runaway quantum distortion. But Marcus could feel through their connection that she wasn't strong enough alone. The artificial Etherian's stolen powers were too violent, too unstable to control by conventional means. Without hesitation, Marcus stepped forward and took Lyra's hand, their connection flaring into full resonance. Together, their combined abilities reached out and wrapped around the chaotic quantum field, not trying to control it but offering it something else, peace. Through their link, they spoke directly to the tortured mind of the artificial Etherian, offering him what he had never been given: understanding, compassion, and release from the agony of powers that were killing him. The artificial Etherian's scream cut off abruptly. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, his silver eyes clear for the first time since the stolen abilities had been forced into his mind. Then, he collapsed, not dead but, finally, free from the constant pain that had driven him to the edge of madness. The chamber was silent except for the sound of damaged gravity generators trying to restore normal conditions. Council members slowly emerged from cover, staring at the scene before them with a mixture of awe and horror. "The other two," Lyra said quietly, turning to face the remaining artificial Etherians. "They're suffering the same way. How long do they have before the stolen abilities completely consume their minds?" Ambassador Vextar looked at his remaining operatives, both of whom were now showing clear signs of instability. Their quantum fields flickered erratically, and their silver eyes held the same barely controlled madness that had consumed their companion. "This proves nothing," the ambassador said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Temporary setbacks in the enhancement process." "This proves everything," Ambassador Chen interrupted. "The Etherian genocide wasn't just about eliminating a species. It was about stealing their abilities, no matter the cost in lives and suffering." Administrator Kelvik stepped forward, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's emergency lighting. "In light of the evidence presented, and the clear demonstration of the unstable nature of artificially induced Etherian abilities, the Galactic Council will now vote on formal sanctions against the Zeltharian Empire for crimes against sapient species." But, before the vote could begin, alarms started blaring throughout the station. Emergency broadcasts filled the chamber's communication systems with reports of Zeltharian fleet movements throughout the galaxy. It seemed the Empire had decided that if they couldn't silence the truth legally, they would do it by force. "The Zealous and 15 other Imperial fleets have left their patrol sectors," came a frantic voice from the station's traffic control center. "They're converging on Concordat Station 7. Marcus felt his heart sink. They'd won the battle for truth, but they were about to lose the war.